Wow, 52 minutes. We went under an hour before questions started. So I think I don't know, I either maybe we're being more efficient or we're
You
just
just
tired.
jinxed it.
Yeah, probably. This was the last time we'll ever do it this quick. All right, patreon.com/managing Madrid. You go there to get guaranteed responses to your questions. You go there to get access to a bunch of bonus podcasts. One of the most fun podcasts we've done all year was the post-game show for the Borussia Mönchengladbach game, where Matt and I provided a Zoom link to our patrons who logged on, interacted with us. That was a ton of fun. Again, all that fun stuff is on patreon.com/managing Madrid. So live post-game shows on Zoom, plus loan tracker episodes, plus mailbags, more match analysis, a bunch of fun stuff. So first patron question from Al. He says, hey guys, first, amazing work. Tonight's game, in my opinion, was the best one this season. Solid performance from the team. I felt really sorry for Vinicius Jr. Is the team trusting him less, since he seemed to receive the least amount of passes from the team?
So I was waiting for this one. You guys obviously discussed Vinicius a little bit, but I just obviously I thought it was better to kind of table it for now. So we're not in their heads, so I can't definitively say that, it's not the case that they don't trust him. I just think it was down to the game plan. So, he mentioned, or Al mentioned that Vinicius received the least passes. So in the 79 minutes he was on, he also had the least amount of touches out of anyone on the team besides Courtois, obviously. He's the least out of any outfield player. And you can say a lot of things about Vinicius, and I'm not necessarily going to go out and say he had a good offensive game. I basically don't disagree that he wasn't that effective on that end. But, the one thing about Vinicius is even if he has a bad offensive game or whatever, he's involved. And I just think the strategy of the game, which is to have Cruz as the locus of all the touches in the left, and basically it's his sphere of influence. And given Atletico's shape and what we need to do to disorganize them, everything needs to go to the right. So Kroos gets on there, sure, he would play passes out to the left, but ultimately his end goal is to suck Atleti in there and then switch it to the right-hand side of the pitch. So, if you look, Lucas Vasquez had 68 touches. He had, about 17, 18 more than Lucas. Carvajal, I'm looking at passes. In terms of touches, it was a lot more. Carvajal had 101, touches. Lucas Vasquez had 100 touches. So when you just think about it, right, and you compare it, we mentioned how, Lucas wasn't necessarily that much more offensively effective than Vinicius. I think he had his moments, right, like that one shot he forced Oblak into, but I don't think it was a sizably more effective or efficient game than Vinicius. It's just that the game plan and the fact that Kroos was there on the left-hand side meant that everything was going to go to the right eventually as a means of starting any meaningful offense because, one, that was just a game plan, and also it made sense. So in this specific context, I think that explains kind of why Vinicius wasn't really getting on the ball. As to whether his teammates trust him or not, I don't really know. There's the Benzema comments or whatever, but that's not something I think any of us really know, and I'm personally not as interested in that kind of stuff. I just want to look at what is actually tangible and what we can analyze on a pitch, and there's a pretty clear tactical reason why Vinicius didn't get that many touches.
Yeah, with Cruz playing the switch nearly every time he got it too. I mean, a lot of our play, and we talked about this, Keon, after the Gladbach game too. A lot of the play was down the right, and this was the same in this game as well, which was kind of the opposite of how we think of Real Madrid, because for so many years we've always we've been more dominant and played more down the left, but in the last two games we've been right side heavy, and I think it's something that's maybe thrown our opponents off as well. So I'm kind of with you. I'm not so sure it was them looking him off. I think it was more so a tactic of the game.
Well, I was going to say, every time, basically, the play would start with Vasquez and Carvajal on the far side, and there would be no space. So they would circle it back and then bring it to Cruz on the left side. Cruz would either switch it back, slingshot it back to the right side, or the play would kind of fizzle out on the left side because Mendy and Vinicius couldn't find a way through Trippier and Llorente. So apart from that, I agree. I do think it's a byproduct of kind of the way this game was a little bit structured. I I did think it was interesting to just dig up some actual numbers this season to see if this is true or not. And again, these findings won't necessarily tell you either way, but it may kind of debunk the way you think about it. I don't know. So this season, per 90, the number of times Vinicius was a target of an attempted pass, career high 56.5. More than last year, more than the year before that. He's also the recipient of 77%. He's received successfully 77% of the team's passes to him. That's also a career high for him. So, when he gets the ball, he's successfully receiving it. So the reason I bring those two numbers up, one is because his teammates are looking for him, and two is because he's doing well to provide as an outlet. And when he gets it, he's not getting dispossessed under pressure. He's actually controlling it, bringing it down. So there's trust. I think there's two-way trust there. So, sometimes also I think we don't know, and I don't mean necessarily anyone on this podcast or anyone asking the question. I just mean collectively, sometimes we don't know how to measure something like this because it can be an intangible thing, like Om said. Like if somebody is purposely not passing to someone at a professional level, it's very unfathomable. And if it is, it's hard for us to prove, right? There's also a different side of this. Sometimes people intentionally don't pass to someone from a tactical point of view. Like Matt, you and I were mentioning, Sergio Reguilon used as a decoy. Kane and Son look at him wide open, look him off, cut inside. Things like that are possible too. Again, not necessarily in the context of this game, but maybe as a general kind of rule of thumb. So again, unless it's like something very, very obvious, like the only time I can remember thinking something like this is obvious is like in basketball when Kobe, remember when he intentionally wouldn't shoot because he was like criticized for not passing to his teammates. So he had that one game where to make a point, he just exaggerated. He passed up every open shot. It's like, unless it's like something that obvious, I think things like that are kind of too hard to measure and tell if there's a conspiracy or not. So I don't know if there's a lack of trust necessarily.
I have a quick question for Owen because Keon, I was listening to you and Lucas on the mailbag on Thursday, and I thought it was interesting that Lucas felt Vinicius had not developed or had not taken significant steps in his development over the last 2 years. And Owen, I thought it would be interesting to get your opinion on that. What do you think? Do you think that Vinicius has kind of been more or less the same since he arrived at Real Madrid?
I think after he kind of made his breakthrough under Solari, I do think there has been a bit of stagnation. But it's also not that uncommon. Like often there's you're just kind of the same, and there's just kind of a buildup of all these little factors, and then they all kind of come together in the right chain, and suddenly it leads to a huge leap. Like growth isn't linear, not just in football, but in life. And, we've seen that with so many players. One, not that he's going to be Cristiano Ronaldo, but that was kind of how Cristiano Ronaldo's growth came. Like the difference between his 06-07 season and the three that preceded it are pretty damn huge. You can look at Raheem Sterling, who was always kind of an effective player, but he didn't really get going until 2017-18, where suddenly you're looking at an immensely productive player and someone who's still not an amazing finisher, right? Like someone who gets his goals from how he positions himself in the box. And, you look at him before, very inconsistent, 5 or 6, goals a season, maybe 4 or 5 assists. So I would agree that, I do think it's kind of hard to point at areas of Vinicius' games that have gotten remarkably better. I think, his decision making is a little better, actually. I think, in today's game, his passing accuracy was actually good. I think his ball retention was good. But in some areas, like his dribbling, it seems to kind of have regressed a little bit, at least until this point. So, yeah, I think it's mostly been kind of Vinicius is who he is and has been for the past couple of seasons. But I don't know the argument Lucas made because I didn't hear the podcast. But if it is that, because of that, it means he's not going to grow and make a huge leap in the future, I don't agree. He's still 20 years old. And I think there's just as much potential for all those things to come together. And all of a sudden he has, an 06-07 season or a 17-18 season, and suddenly we're like having a completely different conversation about him.
Yeah,
I mean, Matt, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think the best example, like for Real Madrid supporters, is Marcelo. He's kind of, and they're similar players in a way, and I think Marcelo, to your point on that, like just a major growth spurt under Capello where he didn't even play. Then Schuster and Juan de Ramos, those 2 seasons, he played a lot, but like you would say he didn't really develop that much. Like he's more or less the same player. And then under Pellegrini, he was at left back. He was more or less the same player. And then Pellegrini moved him up to left mid for some games, and he started to score some goals, started to get his confidence up. And then once Mourinho came, that's when he really the growth spurt was kind of exponential from there. So that's 3 to 4 years right there of kind of more or less stagnant, and then a sudden growth spurt, and then a huge one. So I think Marcelo is a good parallel. And yeah, and to your question about Lucas, he wasn't saying that it wasn't that it'll never come for Vinicius. He was just saying that up until this point he hasn't he has kind of stagnated.
Yeah, I don't think Lucas is wrong when he says that. But I also like I don't growth isn't linear. So I've written like an annual Vinicius column now. So last year and this year. Last year was like all about like the sophomore slump is real. Like the first year you come out, you get the scouting report comes out. The second year, people know what to expect. That's why sophomore slump is real. It's not a hoax. It's like people just can figure you out a little bit better. And then you had growing pains, and if you're really good, the cream rises to the top, and eventually you start figuring out again, and you hit your peak later. So that's what Vinicius is kind of going through. I will note though, like even writing my column about him this year, his defensive efforts still remain a constant, and that's something that is always a good sign. You notice him on the field, that's always a good sign. His dribbling has not improved and has actually, in fact, regressed. And so that does worry me a little bit. And I'm more talking about like just his dribbling efficiency. His attempts are up. His dribbling successful. His completion rate is down, but his dribbling completed amount of dribbles are down. So that stuff, I don't know how you guys feel, but when I see him with the ball at his feet and I see him sizing up a defender trying to go past him, I don't feel confident that he's going to win that duel.
I agree. It's completely different. Like I knew Vinicius was going to lose dribbles in the 18-19 season, but when he started facing up a defender, especially when they're backpedaling, like I just couldn't stop myself from like sitting, forward in my seat because I was like, he can do it, right? Like he can just find a way to jink past his man, and all of a sudden he's like, apparated himself near the box, and like we have a guy who's like a one-man ball progression machine in the final third, and that does seem to have gone away a little bit. We just talked about how hard it is to kind of like, analyze these types of things and find evidence, but I just do feel that his confidence in dribbling situations is not what it should be. Like, even if his attempts or whatever are the same or whatever, there are moments where he sizes up a defender 1-versus-1 and he just passes backwards, where I think you just attempted a dribble against 2 players in, a tight situation where you didn't have much of a chance. And then you had a clear 1-versus-1 that the team set up for you and you looked him off. And then when you do see him go for it, it's just, I'm sure all of us have played 1-versus-1. We've all fancied ourselves as 1-versus-1 dribblers at some point. And when you make your move, it has to be decisive and you just kind of have to commit and go for it. And you can just kind of see him second guess himself. The technique on like whatever skill he pulls off isn't clean, and like this wasn't who I saw in 18-19. So in that respect, I agree. That is kind of what worries me the most about him. Everyone focuses on his finishing, whatever, like to me, like that just will come. Like I don't understand the value of complaining about every single game, but to me, the dribbling, his strongest strength, someone with elite ball control who has the bravery and audacity to pull things off, looking a bit, I guess, tame when it comes to that, which is like just purely an eye test thing for me. That is a little worrying, and I need that to come back. That to me is kind of what like made me look at his ceiling in such a positive, optimistic way, because not many players can do what he's done with the ball in the past.